Happy New Year to all ancient Egyptian men and women. Today is the first day of Akhet, the New Year in ancient Egypt. At that time, the annual Nile floods began, leaving fertile black silt on Egyptian land. On this special day for ancient Egypt's men and women, we will clarify a popular theory about extraterrestrial or astronaut involvement in humanity's past, particularly in ancient Egypt. This video's goal isn't to debate the existence of beings from elsewhere, but to discuss this historical topic using existing research, in order to allow everyone to understand how, in ancient Egypt, they reached the age of the pyramids without any intervention from above in every sense. Numerous documentaries on this topic, likely aiming for sensation over information, have aired online or on channels like Radio Monte Carlo Découverte and History Channel. Many of these documentaries, including The Revelation of the Pyramids and its sequel, are acknowledged by most Egyptologists and historians as being fake documentaries, that is to say, false documentaries. The criticism is based on the fact that the documentaries mostly feature speakers who are not initiated in historical matters. Some are labeled as scientists, but they're actually journalists or writers. As a result, critics of these documentaries point out the lack of legitimacy, not only of the speakers, but also of the arguments supporting the theory presented. So the big question arises: how did the ancient Egyptians manage to build the pyramids and become one of the world's first great civilizations? The feats achieved to build the pyramids are incredible, to the point that they are the main reason for the existence of the myth we're discussing today. Remember, Egypt's pyramids were built during the Old Egyptian Empire, that is, around 2,500 years before Jesus Christ, which means more than 4,500 years ago. At that time, the rest of the planet was not walking around in animal skins, as some supporters of the ancient aliens theory cheerfully claim. Humanity had already encountered civilizations such as the Sumerians, the inventors of writing. And at the same time as ancient Egypt was developing, the Indus civilization was flourishing, a people who built great cities that rivaled the splendor of ancient Egypt. This does not take away from the genius of the people of ancient Egypt, on the contrary, but simply allows us to place ourselves in history with a capital H. Many elements seem to pose problems for supporters of the ancient aliens theory. For example, elements such as the transportation of the enormous blocks used for the foundations and the construction of the interior and exterior of the pyramids. The structure's precise geometry and placement are intriguing. This also includes aspects of ancient Egyptian religion and the scientific and human advancements of this civilization. It's impossible to address every point from supporters of this theory without being tedious, especially since that would only be of limited interest. That's why, in order to address this myth, it's interesting to try to understand what could have led to this misunderstanding and what the reality actually is, based on research that has been developed for over 200 years. First of all, what is a pyramid in ancient Egypt? What was it used for? Thanks, Jules. That helps put things in perspective. A pyramid is an ancient Egyptian funerary monument mainly used as a tomb for pharaohs who were seen as divine incarnations on earth. It also served, though less prominently, as a tomb for queens and important state figures. The concepts to consider when analyzing such monuments, therefore, by necessity, involve understanding the perspective of that era. We need to address three elements related to the myth we're discussing today. We will address the subject head-on with Imhotep, not just from the side. For each point, the screen will show the number in ancient Egyptian. Numbers 1 to 10 are written as simple sticks. I'll go with them for their pronunciation. The statements based on elements presented as facts by supporters of the ancient aliens theory often have no real basis. They come from an interpretation that overlooks many present elements. Many claims overlook that the pyramids weren't built overnight in a sudden flash of genius, but were developed through centuries of trial and error. The first pyramid worthy of the name is the Pyramid of Saqqara, which was a step pyramid and therefore did not have a smooth slope. It was built in the 27th century before Christ by order of Pharaoh Djoser and his architect Imhotep. It was only in the following dynasty, under the reign of Pharaoh Snefru, that the first attempt to build a smooth-sided pyramid appeared with the bent pyramid. In other words, a pyramid whose slope changes abruptly halfway up. Due to calculation errors and poor preparation of the base and the ground, this attempt failed because the smooth-sided pyramid wasn't built and the structure is unstable. This failure will teach the pharaoh's architects and site managers valuable lessons. During Snefru's reign, the first smooth-sided pyramid, the Red Pyramid of Dashur, was built. The interior is still basic compared to the Giza pyramids, but the key point is that the smooth-sided pyramid emerged. After much trial and error, the Egyptians had learned how to build them. The Pyramid era's peak monumentally was during Pharaoh Khufu's reign, who built Egypt's largest pyramid. It's a process spanning multiple reigns and dynasties, marked by trial and error, innovation, clever solutions, and failures. This eventually enabled the construction of Egypt's Great Pyramids. Next, we need to address a second point about today's myth. Supporters of the ancient aliens theory use a highly questionable approach. Professional Egyptologists, meaning those who make a living from Egyptology, are systematically dismissed because they're considered part of the system that has supposedly been lying to us for years. Agreeing with the scientific approach and Egyptologists' conclusions is one thing, but it seems absurd to ignore all the work done in the past and rely only on one's own observations. We cannot answer all the questions raised since ancient Egypt's rediscovery over the past 2 centuries. It would have been wise to maintain a critical perspective while recognizing the clearly documented uncertainties, such as the placement of the pyramids, the movement of the blocks, or ancient Egypt's ability to mobilize a massive workforce for its time. We'll revisit these points in the last section. On the advice of Hemotech, let's move on to the next point. The third and final point we will address today concerns the perspective from which supporters of the ancient aliens theory view ancient Egypt. The perspective is shaped by today's culture, perceptions of possibility, mobilization abilities, and values. This mistake may seem obvious, but likely fuels many arguments for this theory. Thus, it should be known that elements such as astronomy, which are generally anecdotal in the Christian world, were of great religious, symbolic, and mythological importance in ancient Egypt. So it's logical that Egyptian institutions had made significant efforts for nearly half a millennium in order to be able to understand the sky, that is, simply to be good at astronomy, since this was an important element of Egyptian religion. It's consistent to see this element in the placement of pyramids, funerary, religious structures used to bury the pharaoh, considered a god on earth. This is not sudden, but the product of religious and scientific evolution over 500 years. Trade and goods transport were done via the Nile. The river was therefore not only a source of agricultural prosperity, but also the equivalent of a major highway. For example, a port had been built not far from the pyramids of Giza to facilitate the arrival of the blocks from the various quarries that were located further south. So it was the current of the river flowing from the south, where the quarries were located, to the north, where most of the pyramid construction sites were. Over the centuries, sometimes combined with the force of the wind, which made it possible to transport the blocks. Nevertheless, most of the blocks came from quarries relatively close to the construction sites, with limestone blocks serving as the main material. Since this mineral was found in both Lower and Upper Egypt, nearby quarries could just transport the blocks. That is, to place them on a kind of sled, then pull them to the construction site while wetting the sand in front of the sled to make it easier to move. Other serious theories exist about moving these blocks shorter distances. The idea was to share the perspective most Egyptologists accept. Finally, it's important to realize that ancient Egypt mobilized an extremely large workforce for its construction projects. Herodotus said up to 100,000 workers could be employed on the construction site, while modern estimates by Egyptologists put the number closer to 20,000. Estimates by Egyptologist Barry Kemp and anthropologist Carl Butzer suggest Egypt's Old Kingdom population was between 1 and 1.5 million. This implies that 2 to 10% of the population worked on the construction sites. That's not unreasonable, especially given the country's ability to mobilize people. This ability to mobilize can be explained in particular by the fact that the population living off agriculture, who made up the majority at the time, found themselves without work during the flood season and saw it as an excellent opportunity to increase their income, since the work was paid in food or goods. The workers were mainly free inhabitants of ancient Egypt, joined by craftsmen whose specific skills were needed, and a number of common criminals or prisoners of war sentenced to forced labor. There were technically no slaves on these construction sites. Let's also remember that a pair of workers could sometimes spend up to 2 days working on one side of a block to adjust it, which may seem incredibly tedious and boring nowadays, but was completely accepted at the time. We could discuss this subject for hours since it's so vast and fascinating. The goal was to provide a clear, simple perspective based on verified facts, so you can judge the validity of the ancient aliens theory yourself. Check the references in the description below to learn more. Before ending this episode, I want to thank Litchi for her wonderful contribution as the talented illustrator and character creator. Thanks also to Darius for composing this episode's background music. You can listen to the work via the SoundCloud link in the description. And Stefan for thoroughly reviewing the elements presented. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and share your thoughts on this topic in the comments. I invite you to follow me on Facebook and Google+, where I regularly post about a wide variety of historical topics, always with the aim of sharing clearly and simply, whether it's anecdotes or clarifying myths and misconceptions. See you next time.